You know, when I came down here for the Pastor Parish Committee interview prior to being hired as the assistant pastor here, one of the pertinent questions that was asked to me as we gathered together that evening was, are you a Steeler fan? And I said, yeah, but to tell you the truth, I really prefer baseball. And they hired me anyway, so I'm glad for that. But I do like to go to baseball games. I don't get to a lot of them every year, but several over the course of the season, and usually it's something we do together with family. My brother and I sometimes get a book of tickets that help us to get a reduced price, and that makes it a little easier to attend some of the games, and so it's just a nice thing to do. And so a couple of weeks ago, we went to a ball game down at PNC Park, and I had a great time there. It was fireworks night, and so we had a real nice occasion with that. And then we came walking out of the park. And as we did, we had this feeling of elation about a come-from-behind win and the nice atmosphere there at the greatest ballpark in all the United States. And as soon as you walk out onto the Clemente Bridge, you encounter about a half a dozen folks that are sitting there with signs that say, "Homeless, please help." And as you see these kinds of things, you have a lot of mixed feelings about this. What do you do in that kind of a situation? If you're like me, you feel torn, but at the same time, wanting to help, you feel skeptical about things. You don't know what that person might spend that money on that you hand to them there as you walk by. They might use it for food, or on the other hand, they might simply use it for alcohol or drugs to further deepen the problems that they're already facing. You've heard the stories about panhandlers making $50,000 a year, and you want no part of that. And neither do I, quite frankly. But you probably just spent the better part of $100, even if, like me, you go cheap. When I go to a ball game, I park downtown at Smithfield Liberty for $5 and walk through the town and then across the bridge so I can get over there without having to pay $20 to park on that side of the river. I come across a guy at the end of the bridge who's selling the water and the peanuts, and I spend about $5 or $6 there with him. And then you get into the ballpark, and $10 for one of Manny's combo combinations, which is really the best deal in the whole place. Another $6 or $7 for nachos if you're really hungry. And then the seat itself is $22 out in the outfield grandstands, which is my preferred location. And you multiply that by the other folks that are along with you, the kids or the grandkids, and you've spent a bit of money that evening. So maybe as you walk out and encounter these persons holding up these signs about needing help, you feel a little bit of guilt because of how blessed you are and what you have and what you've just spent. And then you see the pitiable conditions that they present themselves in, perhaps even prompting you to look down the river the other way to avoid seeing what is there in front of you. Maybe this story of the rich man and Lazarus comes to mind, and you feel a sense of judgment as a result of that. Should I give this person a few dollars? Maybe not, because of the reasons we just looked at a moment ago. Should I direct them to a place where they might be able to find food and shelter? Well, they already know about that, so you're not really offering very much help if you take that track. Should I just walk on by and ignore the situation? If I do, I might feel guilty or sinful because of that. It's posed a significant dilemma for me in my own life personally and in my life professionally as a pastor. Often people come seeking the assistance of a church when they have some kind of a financial need. And most of the churches that I have served over the years usually have some kind of a local mission fund through which we will help individuals, but we don't have the kind of resources available to help with things like paying for delinquent rents or utilities that may have come into arrears or things that would help evaporate the limited funds available very quickly so we wouldn't be able to help anybody at all. I'm going to tell you a little story here, and it's difficult for me to tell you because it's kind of an indictment on myself in some ways, but maybe it's something that will help you along the way as well. You know, I was telling somebody the other day when I was down here on Friday that whenever I prepare a sermon and present it, I don't have anybody out here in mind when I'm doing that. At this point, I don't really know most of you that well, so I can't be directing it at you, can I? So what I usually do is I look at a scripture that tries to address something that I'm facing in my life, and I put that together and I preach this sermon to me, you see. And as I do that, maybe you can listen in and pick up a little something that's helpful for you as well. So that's why I want to tell you this story that comes out of my own personal experience. A few years ago, as I was serving as pastor at Christ Methodist Church in Scottsdale, a case arose that put me very much in mind of this story of the rich man and Lazarus. I walked out of the house one day, which sat right next door to the church, to pick up my morning paper, and as I did, I looked over and I saw a bicycle parked on the portico of the church leading into the front door. And so I went over to find out what was going on over there, what this bicycle was doing there, because it looked out of place, of course. And as I came over, I found a guy sitting there on the steps. His name was Gilbert, and he told me that he'd spent the night there. Well, I offered him something to eat, which he turned down. He had a little bag from a fast food restaurant sitting there, so he had something to eat. I talked to him for a little bit, and he told me that he was going to go to a temp agency over in Greensburg and get a job so that he could take care of his expenses and find a place to stay permanently. I thought this was a good thing, and I wanted to help him in some way. But I told him, you can't stay here on the church porch. There's just too many issues involved with that. We got to find something else for you, and you need to get things in order in your life. And so I took him to a motel closer to the temp agency and got him 3 nights lodging and wished him well as I departed from there. On the 4th day, he was back on a church porch, having done absolutely nothing to get any job. He never went to the temp agency, never looked for anything whatsoever. He just took advantage of the 3 days and then came back to what he had known before. Well, I contacted a men's shelter on his behalf and found out that he'd been expelled from there, but that they would help find him another place so that he'd have someplace safe and secure to stay. So I gave Gilbert the phone to talk with the social worker at the home, and he promptly hung it up. I was angry. I was really angry at that point, and I said to him it was time for him to leave, and I didn't want him to come back ever again. It's probably not the most Christian thing to respond in that fashion, but that's the way I felt at that particular time because I had tried to do something and everything was just turned away. He left, but only a few hours later he was back. So I called the local police. They came and they asked him to leave, and he did. And a few hours later, he was back. Finally, in a discussion with the officer, he told me that the only recourse was to have him arrested for criminal trespass. I had never in my life ever had anybody arrested. I have visited in jails and prisons. I don't want anybody to wind up in those places. Unfortunately, there seemed to be no recourse. I was torn, spiritually convicted by all of this. That story of the rich man and Lazarus was the only thing I could think about. Was I the rich man in that story? Was Gilbert Lazarus? I couldn't eat with a clear conscience, wondering if this guy was going to be eating anything that day. I couldn't sleep in my nice bed when I knew that he'd been sleeping out there on the church portico. But I couldn't even run the air conditioning without feeling guilty, knowing he was out there in the heat somewhere. Other people would say to me, you did what you could, no worries. But I needed to know that that was the case. I just had this guy arrested. So I prayed and I talked some more with others. I read the Bible passages about caring for others, and I finally found some peace. And that's what I want to share with you here today. Gilbert was not Lazarus. Lazarus was a man with no resources whatsoever, no family, no friends, no government social services, no ability to work nor care for himself in any way. He was sick and he was powerless. Gilbert, on the other hand, had good health, had family from whom he had isolated himself, had public resources which he had eschewed, could work but chose not to. Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, "The one unwilling to work shall not eat, The Christian ethic is that we are to do our part. We are to take responsibility. We are to make contributions to the world around us. And if we're able to do that and we're not willing to do that, we're not to be rewarded for it. So Gilbert was not Lazarus. I, on the other hand, was not the rich man. Throughout my life, I've been a person of average means by American standards. God has blessed me and my family with sufficiency and much more. I've never been without the essentials in my life, and I've had occasion to do things and go places that I never thought growing up I'd ever have the possibility of doing. When I had the occasion to teach in Russia at the time of the change from communism to a capitalistic system, the economy was such that most people were just barely getting by. They would host those of us who were visiting from America as teachers and prepare a meal for us. And we knew that they were probably spending a week's budget on food to provide one meal for us as their guests. They had no discretionary income at all. The usual professor's salary was about $80 for 2 weeks, and the cost of things there was pretty comparable to what you'd see here in the United States. So the two of us who were there teaching received that sum of money after the 2 weeks were up for us, and we bought supplies for the teachers at the school because we could afford them when they could not. I felt rich. And to them I was, as you and I are to most of the world beyond ourselves. But note here in the parable that it's not that the rich man shows contempt or he mistreats Lazarus. He doesn't do that. He may not like the fact that Lazarus is hanging around by the gate of his beautiful palace, but he doesn't have him kicked out either. He allows Lazarus to have the tossed out remnants from mealtime. Now, that's not really amounting to very much. Probably scraps. Back then they didn't have utensils like forks and knives and spoons. They didn't have napkins, and so they ate pretty much everything by hand, chicken or something, and toss it aside. And then to clean their hands, they'd take a piece of bread, break it off, and they'd use that as a cleansing agent, toss that aside. That's the kind of stuff Lazarus was getting. Rich man didn't care if he had that. He had to go out anyway, so no big problem. And so this individual, this Lazarus who was outside, was subsisting on those kinds of things. The sin of the rich man here is that he's totally insensitive to the needs of this truly helpless person and does not care. It's as if Lazarus does not exist at all. He sees him day in and day out, but makes no effort to connect with him and simply goes about his life untouched in any way by Lazarus' plight. The judgment upon this man is really harsh. Both he and Lazarus leave this mortal orb at just about the same time. Lazarus into the comforting arms of Abraham, and the rich man into the realm of fire and brimstone where he is in anguish, especially from thirst. And he calls out, "Father Abraham, send Lazarus to dip his finger in the water and touch it upon my tongue that I might be relieved of this suffering that I'm experiencing here." Remember the description of Lazarus, the sores and everything else that he had, and now this rich man is asking Lazarus to come and dip his finger in the water and place it upon his tongue. He's desperate. And the answer is no. You had it good in your life, and now Lazarus will receive the blessings. Besides, there's a chasm separating them. This is an old ancient Jewish understanding of heaven and hell. The idea was that those who were in heaven could see the suffering of those that had done evil toward them, and that would somehow enhance their joy in heaven, and vice versa. Those who were in hell would look up to heaven and see the glories there, and it would intensify their suffering. That's not really the way I care to view heaven at this point in time in my life. But that was the view that was taking place back then. And so it's built into the parable as part of that illustration. "Then send Lazarus to tell my brothers so that they won't meet this fate." And Abraham responds, "They have the words of the prophets, and if they don't listen to them, they're not going to listen to somebody coming back from the dead either." What a call to personal responsibility this is. Perhaps our greatest trap is the same as it was for the rich man in the story, simply ignoring the needs of other people, putting our personal wants and wishes above everybody else's. Last week, David spoke of the wealthy man who was in a parable that was told to King David about the man who took the lamb from his poor neighbor. A similar type of setting there, reflecting a lack of concern and compassion for anybody else. You know, we cannot solve the problems of everybody around us. Economies that have been based on equality for everyone are shown throughout all of history to be unworkable. They've failed every time they've been undertaken. Even the early Christians in the book of Acts lived in communes where they shared their resources together. They did that because they expected Jesus to come back just about any time, and so why be burdened down with all the worldly concerns? But when Jesus did not return in a timely fashion in their estimation, they went back to a more market-driven economy. But even if we can't solve everything, it doesn't justify not caring. I tried to help the guy on my church's porch. I did care. I did take action, but I could not change his condition because of his refusal. But I can't allow that to deter me from helping someone else today or tomorrow. One thing I've always abided by in my encounters with others who were seeking aid is that nobody left my office hungry. Even if they were obviously working the system and trying to take advantage, everyone needs to eat. And so I would see that that was provided for. Over the years, I've periodically carried in my wallet some gift cards to fast food restaurants to give to somebody that's in need, like the guy that's sitting on the bridge when you walk out of PNC Park. Now, I know that they can take that and turn around and sell it for cash. They won't get much, but they could do that. They could just toss it aside out of contempt because it wasn't money, but that's their issue. It's not mine. I can then know that I've done something tangible and made the effort to help that individual. Do you know that through your offerings on Sunday mornings and those combined with others, the United Methodist Church feeds over 1 million people a day with your help? Our church here at Ingomar helps with a feeding program on the city's north side. And that's something I've been involved with for about 30 years in my own ministry. I learned about it when I was serving the church in Beaver, and every church I served since then has sent people down to help with the North Side Feeding Ministry that is a part of the United Methodist Church in Pittsburgh. And you're a part of that here. You're helping to do that, either by going in person or by the monetary support that you offer as well. Various shelters and missions are in place and benefit from your support and help. We've seen each week on the screen here different missions that the church is involved in. Support these kinds of things because they make a difference in the lives of other people, and they show that we have Christian compassion and care for others. And even taking a moment to talk to someone who is down and out is a mission in itself. In fact, that's probably the most important thing you can do for somebody like that. Rather than handing them cash or anything else, just acknowledging their humanity and giving them a word of encouragement. So the main message here today is this: be aware of the needs around you. Be sensitive to the needs and those persons. Be intentional about responding in a meaningful way that they may offer some sort of hope and help to those who have neither. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, there are so many times when we face confusing challenges in our lives. We want to make a difference